Hi everybody, Jane here, and today I'm coming to you with my May 2019 wrap-up. I did not read nearly the amount of books I hoped to this month. It's been kind of a rough, long month for me. My kids are about to go down to stay with their dad, so we are kind of prepping that. It's also my kid's birthday. Yeah, the month has just gotten away from me. So, I'm a little behind in my reading as far as like my Goodreads goals. So I'm hoping to catch up during the summer when the kids are away. But let's get to it. So I did not read the Kindle book I planned to read. For anyone who's been following my channel, you know I read one book on my Kindle a month, or try to. I did read a Kindle book, it just wasn't the one on my TBR. I started the one on my TBR, I believe it was Redfield. I haven't DNF'd it, but I haven't gotten very far in it, and I'm not sure I'm going to finish it, so we'll get back to that later. The one I ended up reading was sent to me by the author, and it was The Mysterious Neighbor. Now, I will tell you, I ended up DNFing this book. It is a thriller about a girl or a woman, a mother, who I believe her husband is military, and they are from India and positioned in that part of the world on a base. I'm not real familiar with how the Indian structure of like military works. I would assume it's like ours, where you might be in Georgia, you might be in Alaska, and they're just in different areas of the country. I'm not real clear on that though. But anyway, her husband is away doing stuff, and she meets this new girl, and the girl has a small son like her, and so they kind of hit it off, but then weird things start happening, and she just doesn't trust this neighbor. But then her husband's like, I think you're going crazy, you should probably see a psychiatrist. And it was just an interesting plot. I didn't have any problems with the plot. Character-wise, I didn't really like the husband. I thought he was kind of a jerk. And I didn't like that he was constantly telling his wife, oh, you must be crazy, and there's something wrong with you. I could very much relate to the main character as a military wife. The main reason I ended up DNFing the book, just being honest, is I don't know that it was meant for an American audience who doesn't know much about India. I was very lost with a lot of the cultural stuff. Also, it is written in first person, and it is written in a very accented way. So it was very hard for me to read and understand a lot of the book because of that. The main character, she is speaking very much like if you were to have a conversation with somebody from a foreign country who speaks English. I believe the author is actually from India, maybe, and that is probably very authentic to her tongue, but I was so confused by a lot of the word choices. I was confused about the cultural stuff. I would say this book might be something you would enjoy if you know a good bit about India and are familiar with the culture and comfortable with kind of the language. If you're comfortable with the way it is written, I would say go ahead, because it is an interesting story. I just really struggled with the writing. The next book I DNF'd this month, there's two, was Frozen in Time. And this is a nonfiction about Birdseye, Clarence Birdseye, and his frozen food. The main reason I DNF'd this is just this book goes so off topic all the time. I wanted to learn about frozen food. Clarence Birdseye was the guy who invented kind of flash freezing food, and is the reason that we now have all of the frozen dinner, microwavable meals we do, apparently. I don't know, I didn't get that far in the book, because it was constantly all about his long drawn out biography that had nothing to do with food. And this is a short book, okay? I didn't need to know every detail about his life. And then when they weren't detailing that, they were detailing all about the world at the time in a way that wasn't necessarily related to the need for frozen food. Like, this book didn't stay on topic. So I really just, it just, I just didn't, I just couldn't. I needed a nonfiction book that stayed on topic. This was not it. It just was too off the rails. I quit. All right, next 3 books I read, 3, were written by my friends. So I'm not going to rate them. I'm just going to tell you a little about them and then the things that I loved and the things that didn't work so well for me. So the first one is Portal World by J.L. Ender. And this is about, it is a middle grade science fiction about a boy named Theus. His real name is Prometheus, but Theus is what they call him. And he is part of an apprenticeship on the ship with his sister and some other children and adults, and they are sent to explore this thing called Pit World, where there's this giant crater. They don't know why. They're trying to figure it out. And shortly into the book, he gets separated from everybody and finds out that the world is really, really bigger and more complicated than any of them could have imagined. So the things I loved about this book, it is such a creative world. I really loved, without giving too much away, there's so much going on world-wise. Very shortly after Theus ends up separated from his group, he meets with a salamander, a samurai salamander. And that is played on later because salamanders are cold-blooded, and when they get to this area that is frozen, obviously not so good for the salamander who can't make his own body heat. So it was a lot of brilliant stuff like that I loved. I love some of the characters. There's, besides the samurai salamander whose name is Ink, there is also an android who is a knight and like looks like a knight and stuff, and he was one of my favorite characters, like from the get-go. From the minute we met him, I just adored him. So those were the things that I loved about this book. Some of the things that didn't work for me. This book just throws you right in, and I felt like I was sinking a lot of the time. In the beginning, there's so many characters. Now there is at the back like a little list of characters, but I didn't know that. So I was trying to figure out who everybody was, and then I didn't even get to the point where I felt like, oh, I know who you are and where we are, and then we're separated and we're in a different section. And this book, just the pacing was very, very fast, and that's not something that I enjoy. It was very, it kind of was a very adventure story type thing, like, okay, we're gonna go here and do this. Okay, this is happening, and it was cool, but it was a little much for me. It was a little much for what I like to read. So that was my main complaint, is there was so many characters that I felt very confused until we got separated and kind of started building our party again gradually. And then with all the plot related stuff, everything just was boom, 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 boom. And I just felt like I didn't have enough time to really get close to Theus because we were just like on an adventure. And again, that's probably exactly what a reader of this would want. This is not my typical genre, but I didn't enjoy that part of the book. Okay, the next book is Mothman's Vengeance. And this book is about a gentleman named Michael. And his father recently died under some mysterious circumstances. And Michael has to go and clean up the house that his dad was living at. And as he does this, he's kind of exploring a little more into what happened to his dad and the circumstances of his dad's death. Obviously, I don't want to give too much away. But, so I really was engaged in this book from page 1. I really liked the prologue. There's a lot of plot stuff going on that's really interesting. I did like the Mothman and how he played into the story. The thing that didn't work well for me with this book was it is told in third person, like head hopping everywhere. And I really just didn't care for that stylistic choice. That's not something that generally I would read if a book has that. It's just not for me. I don't enjoy it. Additionally, Michael, early in the book, starts kind of having thoughts, feelings for a girl who's not his wife. And like he kind of stops himself. He's like, oh, I shouldn't think that or feel that. You know, I'm a married man. But I had a hard time liking Michael because of some of that stuff. Like later on in the book, it makes a little more sense and I get it, just not on board with it. So yeah, those were the things that didn't quite work for me in that book. The next book is Connor Gepp by Mike Ghere. And this is kind of a sci-fi western-ish story. You have Connor Gepp, who is a stowaway on different spacecraft. And he gets caught as a stowaway and dropped onto this very desolate planet. This planet has, it's like bombed out, I guess. There used to be like cities and old tech is all over this place that they have to dig for, but on the surface it looks kind of like I almost consider like an old west town. They have a sheriff, a boarding house, and these people are spending their days going out digging these ruins for old technology. And Connor is trying to get involved in this so that he can earn enough money to get on a spaceship to leave the planet. I absolutely love the characters in this. Connor is very fascinating. He's very much the lone wolf character who realizes he needs friends. There is a love interest. There is the lady that owns the boarding house is hilarious. I love her. There's a guy named Mudflap who's friends with Connor, and he's really funny too. Just the characters in this were awesome. Connor at one point also starts working with a guy named Skeevy, and he's hilarious. I really enjoyed the characters in this book. My main complaint with this book is that I would have liked to see more world building maybe on the front end. There are areas where, for instance, Connor is very ill and he's having conversations with people or they're talking to him to pass the time. And some of the world building stuff that happens like in the back end, I think I would have liked to know more about, and maybe that could have been put in during that time instead of a summary of they talked about their childhood and like we don't even get the conversation, and this is with his love interest, and I was like, no, I want to hear this. So as without spoiling, try and not spoil anything, as they're searching for tech, Connor comes up on some really interesting tech, and I just wasn't fully aware of like why the world was the way it was, bombed out. I would have liked a little more information of that on the front end so that when we learned about more of the tech on the back end, I could have been more informed. And it's possible that it was there and I missed it because I was just engaged with the character building and the conversations and the funnies. But I would have liked to see a little bit more of that because once we got to the part where all the stuff is happening, where they find this really cool tech and we learn more about the stuff in the background, I just wanted more character building. And I was, again, it's the same problem I have kind of with action-y books, like, okay, this is interesting, can we just get back to more people talking? So this is very much, the first part of this book is very character building, which I loved. And then as you go on, it's a little more action-y. And there is still character stuff. There's some really great moments, even later on in the book, after we get more into the Harrow project, which is the tech that they find. But it just, yeah, that was my big complaint, is I would have liked a little bit more, I just would have liked a little more maybe smoothness to it. A little more of the, why is this place bombed out? What were people's experiences before? What was it like before in the early part of the book? And I didn't necessarily feel I got that as much as I would have liked. And then when we got to the adventure part of the story, I felt like there was quite a bit more focus on that for a while. And I was loving the characters, so I wanted a little more from that. So, yeah, again, interesting. Those three books, I need to clarify, are not my typical genres to read. So I'm telling you what I liked and what I didn't like, but all three are worth checking out. They are written by my friends, so it's very hard for me to give an unbiased review of them. And I did have a good time with them. I just, they're not what I typically read. Just saying. So don't take my word for it. Try them out. I mean, they were all good. They just weren't necessarily what is my typical. All right. The next 3 books that I read, and the only other 3 books I read this month, were all 4 stars. So it was a good month in that way. But I didn't read very much this month. I didn't. All right, so the next book was Jack London and the Klondike Gold Rush. I feel like the title says it all. This is a book about Jack London while he was involved with the Klondike Gold Rush. I thought this book was excellent. It reads like fiction, even though it's factual. Now, the author did say in kind of the notes that some of the stuff he extrapolated or made up, and it may not be 110% true, but some of the stuff is stuff, well, it could have happened, but maybe it didn't happen exactly that way. I didn't care. I had a good time with it. But that is why it's 4 stars instead of a 5, is because there's probably some factual errors, but it was a fun ride. I also loved that, unlike the book that I DNF'd earlier this month, this one did not have the massive digressions. You get an occasional, oh, this is probably what influenced this in his writing, and you get a little bit of, oh, he had this thing happen to him prior to going out to the Klondike Gold Rush that affected him, but there were no massive distracting, like, side roads. It's pretty much stuck to Jack London during his time of the Gold Rush. I loved it. All right, Mr. Lemoncello's Great Library Race. This is the 3rd book in the series. It is about a game maker who buys a library in his hometown and sets it up in a really extravagant, fun way and does different activities there. And basically has turned his library into a ginormous game. He previously did like an escape game where they had to figure out how to get out of the library. And he did a library Olympics where they had to do different games and tasks and tests about library knowledge. And this is kind of more of the same. Now, I will say I gave the first 2 books 5 stars, and this one I gave 4 stars. This is the first time in the series that I really felt like I lost some of my believability. The other books, these are very fun and whimsical and very Willy Wonka-ish. But they always, up until this book, still for me, stayed within I could suspend my disbelief that far. And this one crossed that line for me. I liked it okay. I liked that it had the library themes and, any book about a library I'm going to enjoy to a degree. But I just felt like this one, for the first time, really took us down to it felt like a kid's book. And, it is a kid's book. It's a middle grade. So it's probably fine as a middle grade book. But as an adult reading it, this was the first time I really struggled with it, as this feels like a kid's book, whereas the others didn't. So I am going to read the last book in the series, and I'm probably going to try some of the author's other works because I absolutely love the first 2 books. But I did find this a little bit disappointing because of how much I loved the other 2 books, and this one just was a little too much for me. The last book I read this month is When I Spoke in Tongues, and it is by Jessica Wilbanks, and it is about a girl who grew up in the Pentecostal faith, very, very religious, and then she starts to struggle with her faith, including, going off to explore the origins of her faith, which is in Nigeria, and seeing kind of some of the good things her faith does, as well as some of the negative things. Children in that country, in Nigeria, are sometimes accused of witchcraft as young as 2, and are left basically to fend for themselves on the streets. And all of that is based in kind of the faith that she had grown up in. So it's a complicated story. I really resonated with this because of my own religious journey. And I think if you grew up in a very particular, strict religious background and left, this is a book you will really appreciate, because this very much was similar to my own journey. So I really enjoyed it. There were a couple places where I was a little bit bored, particularly when she was in Nigeria before we got to the kids and the witchcraft. I was a little bit struggling with some of the stuff, and there was a couple times in this book that I thought, oh no, she's going to go back to her faith, and that's going to ruin this whole book for me. And that doesn't happen, thank goodness. But there were a couple times when I'm like seeing her wavering, and I'm like, oh, please tell me this book does not end with her like going, oh no, I was wrong. All the things and all the cracks and all the negatives I saw, I'm just, and I, like, after having read it, I understand when you're going through leaving a faith that you were raised in, you do go back and forth. You do have those moments where you're like, well, this is really good, and I really am on board with this. And then, you see the cracks again, and you see the things that don't work or are kind of upsetting to you. You feel like are morally wrong, the things that bother you ethically. Yeah. So I did have a couple moments in this book where I was like, oh no, tell me she's not going to be like, and then I realized I wanted to be, super religious and I shouldn't have left. She didn't, thank God. But anyway, so I really enjoyed this book. I think if it may not be for you if you've never gone from like a super religious faith to less religious or not religious, you may not really get it. But having gone on a similar journey as her, I totally got it, and I absolutely love this book. So yes, that was what I read this month in May. What did you read? What was your best read? What was your worst read? And what are you reading next month? Hopefully I will, once June comes back on a more regular filming schedule. For any of you who follow me, you probably noticed I've missed a couple filming weeks just due to craziness of family. So I'm hoping to get back on schedule with my reading and back on schedule with my uploads. We'll see what happens. My social media is below if you'd like to chat with me anywhere. And I will see you next time. Thanks, bye.